Hello and welcome to this video, which is about the Little Radiator plugin from Soundtoys. Now this is currently free, so this is a great little plugin which we're going to look at a bit later on in the video, but it's free until January the 2nd. Obviously if you watch this video after that, it's no longer free, but it's still a good plugin. So we're going to take a look at the installation process, because that can lead to some sharp edges which sometimes people cut themselves on, and then we'll look at the plugin in Cubase and also do a bit of analysis of it later on as well. So first things first, here we are on the Soundtoys website. As you can see, it says get it now. So we just click that. That puts it in another page. We can go add to cart. And there we go. So you need to put in the code holiday heat. So this is one of those ones where you might forget it. So you have to put in your email address and your actual physical address, etc. Obviously, I'm going to do that off screen for reasons, because this is the internet. Hopefully you know what your email address is and where you live. If you don't, I think you probably need to do something other than downloading plugins on the internet. You probably need some help in a different dimension. Anyway, we'll see you after I've put that in. So here's where you put in the code, which is holiday heat. You enter that. And then your order becomes free. So then you can complete it. And then you're in business. So first thing you need to do is to download it. So unlike some other manufacturers, this is just a straightforward download. You're not downloading their Uber download plugin that you have to log into, etc. So it should be straightforward. You can pick your operating system. You notice that for Mac, it's just the one download because they're intelligent enough to make life easy for you. So I'm going to download the Mac one, but obviously you download the one you need. And in this case on the Mac, you just run the package. It's pretty similar on Windows. And then you're in business. The next thing to do is to activate it. That's where things can get a little bit more sticky. So Soundtoys is activated on an iLok account. Now, you don't actually need the USB iLok. That's one good thing about iLok, okay? You need to download the relevant iLok license manager, whether it's macOS or Windows, but you need an account. So if you haven't got an account, go to iLok.com and create a free account. It's straightforward, if a little bit janky, because it's iLok. And then you can then sign into that later on in the process. So if you haven't got an account, go to iLok.com and click create free account. Make sure you remember what the details are, because it's easy to get confused. I did this once. It was a nightmare. I'll never do it again. Anyway, create yourself an account, or if you've already got an iLok account, then you'll be good to go for the next step later on. So the first time you open up Little Radiator, you will see this screen, which is to do with activation. So you will have been emailed an activation code, which is needed. So you click activate, and then you can paste it in here. And then move to the next screen. And then you can, if you want, you can try and set up an iLok account here. But I would, as I said, set one up beforehand because it's much easier. So just tick that, register with my existing iLok.com account, click continue, and then put in your username and password for your iLok account that you've created. So I'll put mine in. And then it will ask you for a location. So here, if you had an iLok plugged in, you could say you could put it on there, but here it's just going to put it on this computer. So I'm just going to click the computer there, and I'm going to click next. And then you should be in business. Say, I know iLok activation can annoy a lot of people. It's one of those things where when it works, it's great, but sometimes it doesn't. And their software is pretty slow, and their support is pretty janky, and they're fairly unfriendly and not particularly helpful. But there we go. Anyway, once you've done that, you can then go on and enjoy the plugin, which is what we're going to look at next in Cubase. So here we are in Cubase. As you can see, I've got a project set up with 4 audio tracks in there, and they've got a little radiator on each. So first things first, the user interface. It's pretty straightforward. You've just got 4 controls here. 5 if you include the bypass, but you've got a bypass in Cubase, so I'm not sure if that's not totally superfluous. But anyway, pretty simple. We've got a noise control, which adds just a bit of noise broadband, as we can see later on in the video, because we're going to do a bit of analysis. We've got the bias control, that just increases the amount of distortion. Again, you'll hear and see this. We've got the heat control, which is the gain going into the preamp section, as it were, and then mix, which is really nice because often with distortion effects, you get the right kind of distortion, but you want to balance it out. And with many standard ones, you don't get mix control. So here you can control how much you get of the distortion. So you might want a really heavy distortion, but only a bit of it. And this makes it nice and easy. So enough for my yakking. Let's have a quick listen. So this isn't too extreme. This is just one of the presets, in fact. And on this loop, it just adds, as it says, a bit of warmth. Probably just bring that down just a little bit because it's... Later on in the video, we're going to do a quick bit of analysis of what Little Radiator does, and why it sounds louder will make a bit more sense to you when we look at that. So that's that on that loop. Now let's take a look at it on a different, more relaxed drum loop, because after all, that first one was a bit frenetic. So here we've got another instance of Little Radiator. And again, I've loaded up one of the presets, a bit of grit. And this should give us more chance to hear what's going on because it's a little less intense, isn't it? So the heat control to 0, it's not actually doing nothing, but it's not driving the preamp too hard. And as we turn it up, you can hear the distortion increase. And it gets, much more extreme around here on this particular loop. Now, if you want to see how much you're actually putting in, if you click on the name heat, you'll be able to see the exact value, the control, and we can go under, so we can underdrive it. And in fact, if you really underdrive it, you're just getting a quieter version, pretty much a quieter version of the original signal. So it actually starts altering the level here, but you'll need to turn up your output level or the fader level, etc., to compare like with like, as it were. So now the bias control, we get this to a point where we've got a reasonable amount of distortion. The bias control, when this is turned on, this increases the distortion. Again, we'll see why a bit later on. But so here it's distorted, and you can hear that. But if I turn the bias control on, you can hear, particularly, on the tail end of those toms. So the bias control increases the severity of the distortion. It's quite an uneven, asymmetrical distortion, as we'll see a bit later on. Next up, kind of thing I often put it on, actually, is Rhodes, whirly kind of electric piano. Often just needs just a bit of grit to bring it through in a mix. And this is, in fact, called Rhodes Toaster. So you can see it's just got a little bit of heat, but the mix is all the way wet and the noise is turned on. So it's moderately subtle on this. So it's not a massive difference. And obviously you can adjust this. You can bring this heat up, and you may have noticed there, what's the nice thing about this is we've got an undo control. So if you've made one change, you can undo it. So every now and then I touch a control on a plugin, etc., and you're like, oh no, what have I done? So having an undo, even if it's only a small one, is quite nice. So you can always get back to where you were. But yeah, I think that just needs just a bit more in there for that to work. Again, it's all about context. If it's on its own in a mix, it's going to need something different than if it was in amongst loads of other things competing for that space. And finally, bass. So this is another thing that obviously some bass players don't like it, but a bit of distortion on bass really helps it come through in a mix. And you don't have to be playing in a metal band for that to be the case. So this one, again, there is a preset. We'll look at how the presets load up in a second, but this has got the bass bite preset. And you can hear it's just taking that pretty clean bass, because it's a DI after all, as you can see from the file name, and just giving it a bit of the kind of grit you get from a bass amp. It's not really distorted, but it's just bringing that up, etc. Now, if we go back, we've got bass beef, and you can hear there's lots of sort of distortion artifacts on some of the notes. If we turn the bias off on that, that clears some of that up. But this is probably a bit strong for me on the face of it, just that on its own. But again, in a mix, it may be suitable. Now, preset selection is pretty straightforward. It's slightly annoying. This is the one thing I'm not super keen on Soundtoys plugins, is because we've got this sort of scrolly window. Now, if you've got things in a folder, it's not too bad. But otherwise, you've got this, it's a bit like scrolling in Microsoft Word when you've got a massive document. So there's a few presets here for you to experiment with. You can spend some time on them. And if you want to save something, you can click there, give it a name. So let's call it, and you put it in that user folder. And that's just a folder on your hard drive. So there, that is under there. And then you'll see that will appear under user. But you can, of course, make new folders, etc., and store them to your heart's content. Although, obviously, with a plugin with 4 settings, there's limited need for lots of presets. But obviously, that need increases exponentially with the more controls you've got. So now let's take a look at some of the technicalities of what Little Radiator is doing by having a look at it in Plugin Doctor. So here we have the plugin loaded in Plugin Doctor. We're just going to do a quick look because there's a couple of things I think it's useful to see what it's actually doing, and this allows you to see it really quickly and clearly. So at the moment, because we're on dry, everything that's coming out of the plugin is what we're putting in. So we're at 0 dB, so there's no change. But as we change the mix over to wet, you'll see that these controls actually start to have an effect. In fact, I'm just going to turn noise off. And then as we move the control over, you can see this frequency response changing. So this is what's happening in terms of frequency response as you change to hear the effect of the preamp. And if we go all the way, you can see what we've got looks like a loudness curve that you'd have on a stereo. So we've got a boost low down and we've got a boost high up as well. So that may explain the psychoacoustic effects that you're potentially hearing with that being, you know, seeming louder, etc. As we turn the heat control up, you can see that becomes much, much more pronounced. And in fact, if we go here, we can see we're getting a genuine boost of that and a boost of it at the top end, but it's actually scooping out the mid-range significantly. So although this only goes down to 10 dB, you can see this is going well below there. The other control, which is less apparent when you're listening to it, is noise. So if we turn the noise on, we can see we're getting noise, and you've got a lot of just broadband noise happening all the way through. So there's noise everywhere. It's not an enormous amount of noise, but it's definitely there. Probably enormous from a technical point of view. You probably wouldn't be that happy if you'd built something that did this, but you can see the difference turning that on and off, and listen out for that as you're playing with it. Now, the other area which I think is useful here is the oscilloscope. So if we go between, so I'm going to turn the heat all the way up. If we go from dry to wet, we've got a sine wave here. So let's just look at that and look at the effect of it as we turn this up. So as we turn this up, you can see this, the sine wave is becoming more and more distorted and looking more and more like a square wave, but it's not symmetrical. You see it's curved at the bottom and spiky at the top. That's the distortion that's happening to those waves, and that's why you're getting those extra frequencies generated. But if we turn the bias control on, it becomes much more distorted. So we can see we've got artifacts there. It's a much more distorted signal. So it's even less like a sine wave, and it's more cramped in terms of the lower excursion in particular. But you can see the whole waveform is being changed by the bias control, and you'll see that here. So if we're around this setting, we turn it on and off, you can see that one's much more At that point, it's more sine wavy, but then it's distorted in a different way. So it's doing quite a lot to the signal, and that's why you hear it. It's described in the manual as being a subtle change, I think, but actually I think the bias control makes a massive difference to it. But here you can see really clearly what's happening to the waveform, and that's why tools like this are useful, because you get an understanding of it. And obviously you're not mixing with your eyes or solely going to be looking for a particular effect, but I think it's often useful to be able to see what's happening, so you're understanding in a different way what's happening to the audio. It's not just that you have to listen out for it, it's that you know that it's doing this. That shouldn't mean that you go, oh yes, I can definitely hear it, because if you A/B it and you can't hear a difference, that's fine. You just say, I can't hear a difference, and often there isn't necessarily a difference. But it's useful, I think, to be able to see this, because it's a different way of understanding what's happening to the signal, and then hopefully that will lead to a better and deeper understanding of what's going on. So that's a look at the Little Radiator plugin, which is free at the moment. It's free until January the 2nd. Say the installation we've already covered earlier on is iLok based, so obviously that always comes with a degree of uncertainty and frustration for some people, but that's, I guess, how life is sometimes. But it's well worth it. Their other plugins are great, but they are not free. But they are certainly interesting, and I've had them and used them for quite a long time, and now they are VST3 and Apple Silicon compatible. That's also a useful bit of progression for them, but they've not actually changed in quite a while. But on the upside, they haven't constantly been trying to shill me for an upgrade that I don't really need. I'm looking at you, Native Instruments. Anyway, as ever, hope you found that useful. So, don't forget to like, subscribe, project MTT onto the sky in a location near you, and maybe I can appear like Batman. Yeah, anyway, hope you found that useful, and we'll see you again soon for more Music Tech Tuition.